Hello, and welcome to my 2-minute introduction. Thank you so much first for the opportunity to further explore the Associate Trainer position for the Ideals Institute at the University of Arkansas. Here's what you need to know about me. First, I am a teacher and a learner. I specialize in researching new information and finding the best resources to help teach it to my students. I like to make connections to current events, and I use practical strategies and the latest technology to facilitate it all. That doesn't mean, however, that I only teach online, although I do that a lot as well. But I love the energy that you get from a live group of people, the questions and answer session. I'm very comfortable with that as well. In fact, one of the things I like most about the associate trainer position is the possibility of presenting to live audiences again. My training style is participatory. My experience has convinced me that sit and forget trainings rarely lead to successful implementation of initiatives or deep learning and adoption of new knowledge and skills. I like to use hands-on, real-world scenarios to make learning attainable, and I invite learners to consider the new knowledge or skills in their own setting. I also see training as an opportunity to connect learners to the larger community through discussion and vision sharing with their peers. So there has to be time built into trainings for that purpose. Case-based, collaborative, and constructivist are all adjectives which can be applied to my teaching and learning style. They are rooted in the trainer's ability to bring the educational objectives to life through student interaction, perspective taking, and active construction of new understanding. To illustrate how these techniques and strategies would look in an ideals training session, I have designed a completely new training plan for this interview opportunity. I look forward to the chance to make this training a reality for the Ideals Institute.
Welcome to my sample training. The topic I selected was accessibility and usability for nonprofits. The objectives of this training, and this would be part one of a potential multi-part training. This is simply the introduction and awareness raising of the importance of accessibility and usability for nonprofits, and some implementation tips to get our nonprofit clients thinking about this topic and how it applies to them and to their client and donor base. Following on that, we might find that our clients, our nonprofit clients, would require or ask for further training in specific areas such as website design, training design, and social media. I will attempt to briefly touch on each of those items during this presentation. But the objectives for this training would be as follows. Identify the importance of accessibility and usability design. And I would want this to go beyond simply legal terminology and actually venture into what do our clients need, what would donor experiences be. So some specific case study applications here. Identify selected accessibility and usability best practices for their target audience. And we will go into that further. Evaluate suggested best practices based upon their nonprofit organization and client needs and goals, and apply appropriate accessibility usability design strategies as needed. So there would be an application portion to this training. And then how to seek support from the Ideals Institute, and remember we talked about connecting to other community and online nonprofits as needed. The training plan, audience, format, and materials are as follows. The audience for this training plan, in lieu of having a specific needs assessment or a specific client, this is intended to be a universally applicable training. Due to constant changes in technology and training techniques, social media, website design, new resources, this training could be utilized or could be an important resource to anything from very new nonprofits to those with a fully developed web and social media presence, because they may be using the internet and social media without being fully aware of the impact that accessibility and usability might be having upon their client and donor base. Now I'd like to present the schedule for the accessibility and usability training for nonprofits. As you can see here, I've got my timestamps, the basic locations. I want to point out that this training can take place as a face-to-face training, but it can also take place as a synchronous webinar, which could then be recorded for clients to watch later. Or finally, this could be completely transformed into an online Blackboard or other LMS course that participants engage in and complete in an online course format. And over here are the objectives that are met by each of the topics in the training. Initially, as clients are arriving for the training, for a face-to-face training, I would want to have a meet and greet and a community building opportunity, because I think one of the goals would be making sure that if we're having clients from different nonprofits come in, that they engage with each other and potentially develop a support structure around the trainings that we are doing. I think that's an important goal. Once we started at 9 o'clock, we would be looking at awareness raising, why accessibility and usability matters to nonprofits. Yes, we would mention things like the Americans for Disabilities Act and some WC3 requirements for website accessibility, but I would want to engage our nonprofit trainees in talking about this subject as something that they want to do rather than something that they are being made to do for legal reasons. How this applies to them, how this can help them better serve their community, how this usability and accessibility can help them to meet the needs of all constituents. That would be more of the goal here. User profiles and case studies would be an important piece of that, because we could talk about specific needs cases, such as a veteran with hearing loss, very important here in Northwest Arkansas with our Veterans Administration Hospital. Older adults with vision impairment. What does it mean when we have to have possible screen reader support to review materials? How does that change the way we design? And then we might even seek information from them about select clients that they work with and the client need base that they have, and discuss those as potential usability and accessibility mini case studies. So very specific to their needs and goals. We would then move on to some very specific things, areas of need that they might be encountering as far as usability and accessibility are concerned, such as their website, their social media presence, and any presentations and printed resources that they utilize. This is a very broad overview of this topic, with the potential for a Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4, which would target these specific areas more in depth. So a little bit of use right now and a little bit of preview for the future. So raise awareness of additional trainings and additional areas where usability and design might be important. You've got website. One of the things that we would talk about specifically here is special attention to mobile devices. This is an area of need as far as usability and design that maybe a lot of nonprofits are not fully aware of. And so we would have the opportunity to touch on that in this initial training, and then again to go into that in more detail in a later training. Social media, some things that could be easily implemented right now, with also attention to things that might require a little bit more in-depth training, such as how to manage closed captions for things like YouTube. Presentations and printed resources, we would be able to talk about some very basics regarding visual design. Not too many words on the screen, large pictures, but we would also engage them in a discussion about descriptive presentation. This is where I might refer to something on a slide and say, as you can see in this image, without realizing that there may be people in my audience who can't see that in the image. And so how do you change your script for your presentation to make sure that you are not presenting a barrier to participants in your training? So of course, As we were doing this, we would be demonstrating best practices for presentation by describing everything, by using good usability and accessibility techniques, by making sure that our recorded presentations were fully captioned and correctly captioned. And these are things that we would be paying attention to. The next portion of the training would be the application. As I mentioned in my cover letter, I do not like sit and forget trainings, and I find that application is necessary to really seat that information in memory. And so we would be looking at either sample resources that they could apply this information to. We might have best practices, and then some samples that have mistakes in them for them to identify so that they more easily remember it. We could even expand this to them looking at their own organization resources on their mobile devices or online and doing a self-review. Again, the objective here would be to apply appropriate accessibility and usability design strategies as needed for their client-facing materials. So making sure that they fully understand and can apply the information presented in the training. The conclusion, the wrap-up, and the next steps. We would be focusing on seeking support from the Ideals Institute for further training. So we would talk about where to go from here. We would also look at curated resources, accessibility and usability websites, sample designs, social media resources, and even potentially grants for nonprofits to further their accessibility and usability goals. So all of these things could become part of a resource packet that the trainees could take with them, which would continue the impact of the training beyond just the short period of time that we have them with us. We would have a calendar of upcoming and additional trainings on this topic, and we would encourage them to sign up for those if they were interested. This is a multi-part evaluation plan designed to make sure that we have information about the training participants from the very beginning, the very first contact with the Ideals website or presentation of materials, all the way to the end, the results or the implementation. So my suggestion would be first to have a form on the website for gathering information about constituent interest. So we're talking about a web-based response form that basically just finds out, are you interested in this topic? What kinds of topics are you interested in? This, I believe, would provide us with a lot of guidance about where we should go as far as the trainings that are offered. I would expect that a universal training such as the one described here, the accessibility and usability design for nonprofits, would elicit a lot of interest and would give us the opportunity to set up that training as a live training or as a recorded webinar or as a course. At the time that the participants signed up for the training, so actually registered for the training via the website, then we would look at doing a pre-assessment. And the focus of that pre-assessment would be the current knowledge of accessibility and usability design. This would be a combination of multiple choice and or short answer questions designed to make sure that when the training is actually delivered to these particular registrants, that we meet as many of their goals as we possibly can within the scope of the training. Then we would look at doing an evaluation once the training was delivered using Kirkpatrick's 4-level training evaluation model. So we would be looking at reaction, learning of training objectives, behavior, and results. And all of these would be collected and reported to the executive director so that we could determine the success and applicability of this particular training. Reaction is what we see for the participants at the time of the training. So the questions asked during the training, also a survey of participants at the end of the training about strengths and weaknesses, venue and presentation style, whether or not they plan to implement or feel confident in implementing the information received during the training, and any additional support that they feel they need. So that would be given as an individual survey, and that data would be collected and reported back. Also, we would be looking at verbal assessments or written feedback focused on those training objectives that we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So things like, what is one strategy you have learned? So for example, we would be asking the participants to respond to questions such as, what is one strategy you have learned that will help improve the accessibility of your client-facing materials? And that would be a short answer question that we would ask them to respond to. Or what supports can the Ideals Institute provide your organization to further address accessibility and usability? And hopefully that would be a jumping off point for those additional trainings. We would have support and data to point to the need to develop those additional trainings. Then we would move into behavior and results. So behavior includes observations and interviews with the trainees after the fact of the training. So not day of the training, but later on, either going out to the nonprofits and doing an observation, or a phone call to the trainee to determine their self-reported confidence in their new knowledge and skills regarding usability and accessibility, or whether or not they feel confident in teaching others in their organization. So the idea of taking the information back to their nonprofit and sharing that information. How confident and capable do they feel with that?